Some men don't need enemies to ruin their lives. They do it themselves, slowly, quietly, with a handful of sentences they repeat so often they stop hearing how weak those words really are. Not with fists, not with reckless acts, but with phrases that sound firm, confident, even mature on the surface. Yet underneath they reveal fear, stagnation, and a refusal to grow. The Stoics understood this clearly. They believed speech was never neutral. Your words are not decoration. They are evidence. Evidence of how you see yourself, how you face responsibility, and whether you are still alive inside or merely surviving. And there is no phrase more revealing of quiet decay than the first one we need to confront. That's just how I am. On the surface, it sounds like self-acceptance. It sounds like a man standing his ground. But in reality, it is often the sentence a man uses when he has decided to stop improving. It is not a boundary. It is a surrender. Men who say this have confused identity with immobility. They treat their current flaws as fixed traits and their habits as destiny. They stop questioning themselves, stop refining their character, and mistake repetition for strength. Stoicism rejects this completely. The Stoics never believed character was static. They believed it was forged daily through attention, discipline, and correction. Seneca wrote that as long as you live, you should keep learning how to live. That statement alone destroys the excuse hidden inside. That's just how I am. Because the moment a man says it, he is announcing that he no longer sees himself as a work in progress. He has chosen comfort over clarity. I once knew a man who embodied this perfectly. He was respected from the outside, disciplined in appearance, confident in posture, and proud of his past. But whenever anyone close to him asked for growth, emotional presence, or accountability, the response was always the same: "That's not me." Over time, those words did more damage than any argument could. His relationships didn't explode, they eroded, slowly, quietly. People stopped asking, stopped hoping, and eventually they stopped staying. That is the real danger of this phrase. It doesn't cause immediate conflict, it causes permanent stagnation. The Stoic man understands that identity is not something you defend, it is something you refine. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. If you keep telling yourself you cannot change, that you are finished evolving, your mind accepts it as law, and your life follows. Discipline is not about staying the same. Discipline is about choosing growth, even when it threatens your ego. Men who cling to "that's just how I am" are not protecting themselves. They are avoiding discomfort. They are choosing pride over progress. And the cost of that choice shows up everywhere. Their conversations shrink, their curiosity dies, their emotional range narrows until life becomes routine, resistance, and regret. A Stoic does not cling to identity like armor. He treats it like iron on a sharpening stone. He listens, he adjusts, he corrects, not because the world demands it, but because his own soul does. The man who refuses to evolve doesn't remain strong. He becomes brittle. And brittle things eventually break. This first phrase is not just a sentence, it is a warning sign. If you hear it coming out of your mouth, pause. Ask yourself what you are really defending. Is it principle, or is it fear of effort? Because Stoicism never asks you to accept who you are. It asks you to become who you should be. And that requires humility, awareness, and the courage to admit that today's version of you is not the final one. If this first line felt uncomfortable, that's a good sign. Discomfort is where growth begins. But the next phrase cuts even deeper because it hides behind tradition, masculinity, and silence. It is the sentence men use to avoid their inner world entirely, and it destroys them from the inside long before anyone notices. The second phrase that quietly dismantles a man's strength is one that has been passed down, like a rule carved in stone. Real men don't talk about feelings. It sounds tough. It sounds disciplined. It sounds like control. But in truth, it is fear disguised as tradition. Men who repeat this line believe silence is strength, when in reality, it is often avoidance. They confuse emotional suppression with emotional mastery. And the Stoics never made that mistake. Stoicism was never about pretending you feel nothing. It was about understanding what you feel so it doesn't rule you in secret. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the known world at his time, wrote relentlessly about his doubts, his frustrations, his grief, not to complain but to examine them. He understood that unnamed emotions don't disappear, they rot, and when they rot, they surface as anger, bitterness, addiction, or total emotional withdrawal. The man who says, "Real men don't talk about feelings," is often not strong. He is untrained. He has never learned how to sit with discomfort without flinching, so he builds a wall and calls it masculinity. Over time, that wall doesn't protect him. It isolates him. He becomes emotionally unavailable to his partner, distant from his children, rigid with his friends, and disconnected from himself. He may still function, he may still work, provide, show up physically, but internally he is carrying weight he refuses to name. And anything you refuse to name gains power over you. The Stoics were brutally honest about this. Epictetus taught that freedom begins with clarity, not denial. You cannot master what you refuse to look at. Emotional discipline is not silence, it is awareness. It is the ability to say privately, if necessary, "This is anger, this is grief, this is fear," and then choose your response, instead of letting those emotions hijack your behavior. Men who reject emotional awareness often pride themselves on being calm, but watch closely. Their calm shatters under pressure. Their patience runs thin. Their temper flares unexpectedly. Their silence turns passive-aggressive, because what they call control is actually compression, and compressed emotion always explodes somewhere, often at the people closest to them. There is nothing stoic about emotional illiteracy. Seneca warned that a man who does not understand his inner life becomes a slave to it. And slavery does not look like chaos at first. It looks like numbness. It looks like indifference. It looks like a man who no longer feels joy deeply or sorrow honestly. He just exists. And existence without awareness is not strength. It is decay in slow motion. Talking about feelings does not mean dramatizing them. It does not mean collapsing into emotion. It means acknowledging reality. The Stoic man does not vent to be comforted. He reflects to remain sovereign over himself. He understands that emotions are signals, not commands. Ignoring them does not make you tough. It makes you blind. Many men inherit this phrase from fathers who never learned another way. Men who survived by shutting down. Men who believed vulnerability was dangerous. But survival strategies are not virtues. They are temporary solutions that often outlive their usefulness. A man who refuses to evolve emotionally may believe he is protecting his dignity, but what he is really doing is ensuring that no one truly knows him. And what is dignity worth if it costs you intimacy, connection, and self-respect? Stoicism demands more courage than silence. It demands that you face your inner state without flinching, that you name what is happening inside you before it turns into something destructive. The man who says real men don't talk about feelings is not stoic, he is hiding. And hiding is not strength. Strength is the ability to look inward without collapsing, to speak honestly when necessary, to carry emotion without being ruled by it. If this phrase has ever felt familiar, don't judge yourself. Observe yourself, because awareness is the first step back to authority over your own mind. But once a man learns to silence his emotions, the next phrase comes naturally. It is the sentence he uses to avoid responsibility altogether. And once responsibility is gone, discipline collapses. That is where real weakness begins. The third phrase that quietly corrodes a man's character is one that sounds defensive, but is actually a confession of surrender. It's not my fault. Few sentences reveal inner weakness faster than these 4 words. On the surface, they appear to protect dignity. In reality, they erase it. This phrase marks the moment a man hands over authorship of his own life. He stops being the cause and becomes the excuse. The Stoics saw this clearly. Epictetus warned that we are not disturbed by events, but by the judgments we form about them. And nothing distorts judgment faster than the belief that responsibility always belongs somewhere else. The man who reflexively says, "It's not my fault," may be factually correct in a narrow sense, but stoically bankrupt in every way that matters. He confuses innocence with impotence. He believes that because he didn't cause the problem, he is absolved from responding to it with discipline. That belief is poison. It trains the mind to wait, to resent, to complain, and eventually to rot. Responsibility in Stoic terms is not about blame. It is about power. The moment you accept responsibility, even for circumstances you did not choose, you reclaim control over your response. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind is sovereign over reaction, not over the world. The man who refuses this truth remains emotionally dependent on conditions he cannot command. He becomes reactive, brittle, and small. You see it everywhere. Men who blame their past for their present and use history as a permanent exemption from growth. Men who blame their partner for their unhappiness while avoiding the work of becoming better companions. Men who blame the system, the economy, the culture, the timing, anything that spares them the discomfort of self-examination. This is not realism. It is learned helplessness, wearing the mask of logic. The Stoics would call this a failure of judgment. Seneca wrote that adversity reveals character, not creates it. When a man says, "It's not my fault," he is often trying to escape the mirror adversity holds up to him. He does not want to ask the only question that matters, given what has happened: who must I become now? Older men fall into this trap with particular bitterness. They carry real wounds, betrayals, missed chances, losses that were never deserved. And yet years later, those wounds become their identity. They speak as if life owes them compensation. They narrate their days as if fate is a prosecutor, and they are forever on trial. But Stoicism does not deny injustice. It refuses to let injustice become a permanent excuse for inaction. There is a brutal clarity in Stoic responsibility. You may not be at fault, but you are still accountable for who you are next. That distinction separates men who endure from men who erode. When you say, "It's not my fault," you may feel relief for a moment, but you also close the door to growth, because growth begins the instant you say, regardless of fault, "This is now my responsibility." Responsibility is not punishment. It is leverage. It gives you something to work with. Without it, you drift, you wait, you resent, and resentment is the quiet killer of discipline. It poisons effort. It justifies mediocrity. It whispers that trying is pointless because the game was rigged anyway. The Stoic hears that whisper and rejects it. He does not argue with reality. He adapts to it. He does not say, "It's not my fault." He says, "What is mine to do?" That question changes everything. It forces action. It demands structure. It restores dignity because dignity is born from agency, not from fairness. Life will never be fair. Stoicism was built for that truth. The man who internalizes responsibility becomes dangerous in the best way, unshakable, because he cannot be disarmed by blame or flattery. He knows that every situation, no matter how unjust, still demands a response worthy of his standards. Replace "It's not my fault" with "This is my responsibility now." That single shift transforms frustration into fuel. It turns setbacks into training. It returns command to the one place it belongs, your mind. And once a man abandons blame, another temptation creeps in, one that sounds noble, but often masks resentment and entitlement. It is the phrase men use when they believe the world owes them more than they have earned. The fourth phrase that quietly exposes a man's decline is one that pretends to be self-respect, but is often nothing more than entitlement in disguise. "I deserve better." On the surface, it sounds confident. It sounds like standards, but when you listen closely, you hear something hollow underneath. This phrase is rarely spoken by men who are actively sharpening themselves. It is most often spoken by men who are tired of effort and impatient with results. Stoicism dismantles this mindset completely. The Stoics did not believe life owed them comfort, recognition, or reward. They believed virtue was the reward. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is not to be like your enemy, but he also lived by a harsher truth. The world is indifferent to your sense of deserving. When a man says, "I deserve better," without pairing it with disciplined action, he is announcing that his expectations have outpaced his character. He wants elevation without refinement. He wants outcomes without ownership. This is not self-respect. It is resentment wearing a suit. Entitlement grows when a man compares his internal effort with the external rewards of others. He looks around and decides he has been overlooked, underpaid, underappreciated. Maybe sometimes he has. But Stoicism asks a more uncomfortable question, even if that is true. What are you doing with the time you still have? Seneca warned that life is long enough if you know how to use it. But most men waste it demanding recognition instead of building substance. The man who repeats, "I deserve better," often believes his intentions should count as effort. They do not. The world rewards execution, not self-assessment. Stoic discipline does not care what you feel entitled to. It cares what you practice daily. There is a crucial difference between knowing your worth and declaring it. A man who truly knows his worth does not announce it. He demonstrates it quietly through consistency. He trains when no one is watching. He keeps his word when it would be easier to break it. He improves his craft even when the reward is delayed or invisible. Entitled men skip this part. They want results to validate them instead of letting discipline form them. Older men often fall into this phrase when life narrows. Careers plateau, relationships change, recognition fades. The temptation is to believe the world failed to notice your value. But Stoicism would say that value is not a popularity contest. It is a private contract between you and your principles. Epictetus taught that first you must decide who you want to be, then do what is necessary. There is no clause in that philosophy for deserving, only becoming. Entitlement weakens a man because it externalizes fulfillment. It makes happiness conditional on others behaving differently, appreciating more, giving more. The Stoic refuses this dependency. He does not ask life to meet him halfway. He meets life prepared. The phrase, "I deserve better," often becomes an excuse to withdraw effort, to stop trying in relationships, to stop learning, to stop refining habits. It whispers that since the reward has not come, the work is no longer required. That is how men decay quietly. The Stoic response is ruthless and simple. Instead of asking what you deserve, ask what you are still willing to earn. Ask whether your daily actions justify the standards you claim to hold. Ask whether you are still sharpening or merely remembering who you used to be. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily not to waste time arguing about what a good man should be, but to be one. That is the antidote to entitlement. Becoming instead of demanding, process instead of prize. A Stoic man does not say, "I deserve better." He says, "I will become better," because he understands that better outcomes follow better habits, not louder complaints. When entitlement fades, humility returns. And humility is not weakness, it is accuracy. It allows a man to see himself clearly without inflation or self-pity. From that clarity, progress becomes possible again. But once entitlement takes root, something else follows closely behind. Retreat, a shrinking of effort justified by the belief that responsibility belongs elsewhere. This retreat often shows up in a phrase that sounds reasonable, even professional, but signals a man who has stopped leading and started hiding. The fifth phrase that signals a man has quietly stepped away from responsibility is one that sounds practical, even reasonable, but reveals avoidance at its core. "That's not my job." On the surface, this phrase appears to be about boundaries, about knowing your role, about not being taken advantage of. But in practice, it is often the language of retreat. It is spoken by men who have reduced their sense of duty to the bare minimum and convinced themselves that minimal compliance equals maturity. Stoicism rejects this mindset entirely. The Stoics did not define a man by what he was assigned, but by how he responded to what was needed. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a human being's purpose is to serve the common good, not when it is convenient, not when it is praised, but because it is aligned with nature and reason. A man who repeatedly says "that's not my job" is announcing that his identity has shrunk to a job description. He no longer sees himself as a contributor to order, stability, or growth. He sees himself as a box checker. This is not strength. It is withdrawal disguised as professionalism. The danger of this phrase is that it slowly trains a man to stop noticing what matters. He stops asking what needs to be done and only asks what he can avoid. He stops leading in his home, in his relationships, in his own development, because none of those things were explicitly assigned. Responsibility becomes something to dodge rather than something to carry. I once knew a man who prided himself on being reliable. He never missed work. He paid his bills on time. He followed instructions perfectly. But outside of that narrow lane, he was absent. When his partner needed emotional presence, he said he wasn't good at that. When his children needed guidance, he said they'd figure it out. When problems arose that required initiative rather than instruction, he waited. And over time, people stopped turning to him, not because he was malicious, but because he was inert. Stoicism teaches that virtue is active. It does not wait for permission. Epictetus taught that we are actors in a play, but the role is assigned by nature, not by convenience. Sometimes that role demands effort beyond comfort. Sometimes it demands stepping into discomfort without applause. The man who lives by "that's not my job" avoids this truth. He wants the respect of leadership without the burden of responsibility. He wants the safety of structure without the risk of initiative. But life does not reward this posture. It slowly sidelines it. Men who shrink their effort also shrink their influence. Over time, others learn not to rely on them. They are no longer asked, no longer consulted, no longer needed, and then they wonder why they feel invisible. Stoic responsibility is not about overextending or martyrdom. It is about awareness, seeing what is within your power and acting on it without complaint. A Stoic man does not wait to be told to do what is right. He does not need a title to lead or a checklist to care. He understands that responsibility is not something imposed on him. It is something he chooses because it aligns with who he is trying to become. The phrase, "that's not my job," often emerges when a man is tired, disillusioned, or afraid of failure. It becomes a shield. If it is not your job, you cannot be blamed. If it is not your responsibility, you cannot fall short. But Stoicism would say that avoiding blame by avoiding responsibility is the fastest way to avoid growth. Seneca warned that difficulty strengthens the mind as labor strengthens the body. A man who dodges difficulty weakens himself by default. Responsibility is the weight that builds character. Without it, a man becomes soft, even if he appears rigid. He may still function, but he no longer expands. The Stoic alternative is simple but demanding. Instead of asking, "Is this my job?" ask, "Is this within my capacity to improve?" If the answer is yes, act, not for praise, not for control, but for alignment with reason and virtue. This applies at work, at home, and within yourself. Growth often begins in places where no one is watching and no one is assigning tasks. That is where character is built. When a man stops volunteering effort, he starts outsourcing meaning. He waits for motivation, for permission, for conditions to be perfect. But Stoicism teaches that excellence is a habit, not a role. The man who refuses responsibility today will resent irrelevance tomorrow. And once a man becomes comfortable doing only what is required, something more corrosive begins to form. A quiet numbness. A resignation that sounds wise but drains all urgency from life. It arrives in a phrase so common, so casual, that most men never realize it marks the moment they stopped fighting for anything at all. The final phrase is quieter than the others, but it may be the most dangerous of all because it sounds calm, mature, even philosophical. It is what it is. Many men repeat this line thinking it reflects acceptance, strength, or Stoic wisdom. In reality, when used habitually, it often signals surrender. Not surrender to fate in the Stoic sense, but surrender of agency, of effort, of the will to respond. This phrase marks the moment a man stops engaging with life and starts merely enduring it. The Stoics taught acceptance, yes, but never passivity. They distinguished clearly between what cannot be controlled and what still demands action. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that while external events lie beyond his command, his judgments, his choices, and his conduct never do. When a man repeatedly says it is what it is, he is often using acceptance as anesthesia. He is numbing the discomfort of responsibility. Over time, this numbing becomes a habit, and habits shape character. What begins as a way to cope slowly becomes a way to disappear. This phrase shows up most often after disappointment, a failed relationship, a stalled career, declining health, missed chances. Instead of examining what remains within reach, the man shrugs and withdraws. He tells himself there is nothing to be done, when in truth, there is simply something he no longer wants to face. Stoicism does not ask a man to pretend loss does not hurt. It asks him to respond with clarity rather than resignation. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, but he never suggested we stop acting altogether. Acceptance without response is not wisdom. It is quiet decay. A man who lives by it is what it is, stops sharpening himself. He stops adjusting. He stops choosing. His days begin to blend together. His language loses precision. His standards soften. And because he no longer resists his own decline, the world meets him with indifference, not cruelty. Indifference, that is the real cost. There is a profound difference between composure and apathy. Composure says, I see reality clearly and will act where I can. Apathy says, I see reality and no longer care. One preserves dignity, the other dissolves it. Stoic acceptance is active. It requires engagement with reality, as it is not retreat from it. The man who understands this does not repeat empty phrases to soothe himself. He asks better questions. What remains within my power? What response aligns with virtue? What action, however small, moves me forward rather than leaving me stagnant? The men who fall into verbal resignation often believe they are being realistic. In truth, they are abandoning the inner discipline that once gave them direction. Over time, people sense this. They stop expecting much. They stop challenging him. They stop leaning on him. And eventually, they stop noticing him. A man does not become irrelevant overnight. He becomes irrelevant sentence by sentence. Language is not decoration. It is training. Every phrase you repeat conditions your mind. Excuses condition avoidance. Resignation conditions inertia. Ownership conditions strength. The Stoics understood that character is shaped in private long before it is tested in public. That is why Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations, not as philosophy for others, but as correction for himself. He knew the danger of letting thought slip into comfort. He knew that neglecting the inner voice would eventually hollow out the man. These 6 phrases are not crimes. They are warning signs, signals that a man has begun trading growth for ease, discipline for comfort, truth for convenience. None of them destroy a man immediately. They erode him slowly, invisibly, until one day he wakes up, disconnected from purpose, and wonders where his edge went. The good news is that language can be reclaimed. Every one of these phrases has a Stoic alternative rooted in responsibility rather than avoidance. Instead of, that's just how I am, say, this is what I am working to refine. Instead of real men don't talk about feelings, say, I examine my inner state so it does not control me. Instead of, it's not my fault, say what is within my control now. Instead of, I deserve better, say, I will become better. Instead of, that's not my job, say, this is within my capacity to improve. Instead of, it is what it is, say, this is reality now. I respond. These are not motivational slogans. They are mental postures. They keep a man awake rather than sedated. Stoicism is not about appearing strong. It is about being ungovernable from the inside. A Stoic man does not waste words. He uses them deliberately, knowing they shape his thinking and his fate. He understands that the world listens less to what he claims and more to what he consistently embodies. When he speaks, his words reflect discipline. When he is silent, that silence carries intent. In the end, strength is not loud, it is precise. And the man who learns to master his language begins quietly to master himself.